We've got major progress to talk about as the Cincinnati Bengals and Hamilton County have made a major agreement on a new Paycor lease.
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, Bengals fans, and welcome to another episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm Jake Liscow, he's James Rapien, and we've been covering the Cincinnati Bengals here on Locked On Bengals collectively since 2016, and you can also find more of James Rapien's work over at BengalsTalk.com, where he covers the Bengals as well. Today, we dive into major progress on the Hamilton County and Cincinnati Bengals reaching a milestone in lease negotiations. It's not a done deal yet, but we've got major progress. Plus, I wanted to circle back at the end of yesterday's episode to Duke Tobin's claim that there just aren't rookie starting spots available and that they're chock full of starters on the roster right now. We're going to dive back into that one and then finish up with some players that maybe we haven't talked about enough in this draft cycle as potential future Cincinnati Bengals. Welcome back to the Everydayers. Welcome back to those of you who make Locked On Bengals your first listen. Today's episode is sponsored by FanDuel, where right now new customers can get $250 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. And James, we've got major progress on a new stadium deal, a milestone of sorts reached between the city and the team.
Yeah, huge news happening on Tuesday morning. And look, this was always, I've been asked about this a lot over the past, say, couple weeks to a month, especially when that guy at Pro Football Talk wrote about the Chicagoland idea. And
That
people were legitimately like, hey, could the Bengals move? And I was like, there's a very little chance they move. And if they move, they're moving counties. Like they may move a few miles into Kentucky. Like if that does happen, I don't think that they're moving and leaving the tri-state area. But I still felt like, just with those conversations in person with people, that there was still some doubt, some concern. Well, this can put that to bed. Now, we're going to discuss the details. It still needs to be approved by the county. That vote will take place next week. But when they announce something like this, where they come to a thumbs up agreement, everyone seems to be able to hammer out the major details. It's kind of like the Jamar and T thing, a much bigger scale. But once you get to this point, it could take a little time, but it feels like they're at a point where things are going to get done before that June 30th extension deadline. And in that deadline from a long-term deal perspective. So this is great news. It's great news for the Bengals. I think it's great news for Hamilton County. And it's great news for Bengals fans and Locked On Bengals listeners and all of the above, because it means that the Bengals are staying put on the banks of the Ohio, and Paycor Stadium is going to be the home of the Bengals for a long time.
Yeah, the good news is that it could mitigate drama to me. This doesn't necessarily have to be something we're talking about when training camp rolls around. Maybe we're talking about it into June. Maybe things still come close to June 30th. And I wouldn't rule that out. We'll talk about the details here and why I wouldn't rule that out. But it curtails the drama to some degree. It signals significant progress, and it involves a bit of an outstanding question as to where the funding is coming from. And that's what will have to be hammered out between the vote next Tuesday, assuming that it goes as expected, in June. But what has happened is that the county and the team have agreed to, this is a new term for me, a memorandum of understanding, which is not something that I've ever heard of before. But the Cincinnati Business Courier, the first to report that the agreement is essentially that the team and county will work together on an $830 million renovation project that will involve funding from the team, that will involve funding from the city, and the county, and both the county and the team will be seeking funding from external sources that include the state. And as part of the agreement, it involves numerous occasions and bullet points that have the Bengals and the county collaborating on securing that funding, including that state funding. And so that is the remainder of the work to be done, assuming that this term memorandum of understanding, that you're going to see abbreviated as MOU, and you're going to not know what the heck that means, is voted on and approved next week. I feel slightly less sure about this, James. You likened it to the Jamar Chase and T. Higgins final days, when we knew that was essentially done, and we were waiting for the quote unquote official go ahead from the agent and players that it was done.
Mhm.
I'm a little bit less certain about it, just because this is local politics involved, right? And
Sure.
there are politicians
Well,
involved, and who knows, right? But it's very likely that, given the news today, you should see this MOU approved next week, and then some work remaining to be done to secure all of the outstanding funding sources that the team and county are seeking.
yeah, with deals like this, there's more to it. So yeah, you're right to be a tad more skeptical. Like, we knew Jamar and T were done, and it was the behind the scenes there was getting the guys into the states and getting them back to this country, and then going from there. This is obviously different. It's banking on a few things, but honestly, my biggest concern was the county and the Bengals finding common ground and being able to find that area. I've said it a bunch of times on the pod. You're probably sick of me saying it, but and maybe our everydayers are too. But like, the county got its butt kicked in the 90s during the stadium deal, and they were well aware of that, and they clearly didn't want that to be the way it felt this time. And the Bengals had a great deal and have a great deal, and they probably knew they would have to bend some, but can they find that common ground? I was legit wondering if that would be possible. And not that they were moving. I didn't think they would become the St. Louis Bengals. Like, I didn't think that. But I thought that they could potentially move counties. I thought that was a very real possibility that the Bengals didn't prefer, but had to be open to in their mind. And that Hamilton County deep down didn't want. But when you're playing the negotiating game, you have to be at least semi-open to talking the talk, and potentially going down that path of walking it. And the good news is the fact that they found common ground this early. I mean, pre-draft, 2+ months ahead of that deadline.
Early.
I think if it is, or I thought this would be something that would maybe June 22nd, they get a memorandum of understanding. I Googled it, by the way, to figure out what MOU. I've heard of IOUs. I haven't heard of no MOU. I've heard of the MCU. I haven't heard of but yeah, I think, and I don't think we're alone in that bucket, by the way, of not knowing the MOU. But a memorandum of understanding is a memorandum of understanding, and it is good news for all involved.
Classic local politics terminology. So the Bengals in Hamilton County have agreed to terms on an agreement that they will continue to work toward an agreement. It's an announcement of an announcement a little bit, but it is significant progress. It indicates that they have found that common ground, like you said. They've got an understanding of where the funding will coming from. WLW even sharing some screenshots that include what the team is funding in phase 1 of a multi-phase project, which includes club lounge renovations and renovation of suites, concession improvements, and some stadium beautification improvements, whereas the county is in line to fund vertical transportation, so elevators, escalators, electrical power and code upgrades, suite seats, and the Jungle Vision control room listed in some of those photos or screenshots shared from WLW. So some concrete ideas here in place in this agreement, and certainly significant progress, and something that should ease the mind of Bengals fans that were concerned about the team leaving Cincinnati.
Yep. Great news. And it's great news in what hopefully is a great week for the Bengals, a big week for the Bengals, because while they need starters, at least we think so, Duke Tobin doesn't. We'll get to that coming up next. Today's show is brought to you by America's #1 sportsbook, FanDuel, because the NBA playoffs are here. They're here, and whether you're thinking that boy, oh boy, that the Timberwolves are going to continue to roll over the Lakers. Maybe you think that the Warriors are going to fumble the bag against the Houston Rockets after winning that first game. There are so many awesome matchups and intriguing matchups this postseason, and FanDuel is giving new customers incredible ways to get in on all of the action. Right now, when you join FanDuel and place your first $5 bet, you'll get $250 in bonus bets if your bet wins. That means you could throw $5 on the Timberwolves. You could throw $5 on LeBron James. You could throw $5 on a prop bet. You could throw $5 on the Cincinnati Reds or the NFL draft on Thursday. And if that bet wins, you get $250 in bonus bets. Plus, you're talking about FanDuel, America's #1 sports book, where they're going to have all of the live betting, all of the props, all of the odds in one spot for you. Don't miss out. Head to FanDuel.com and claim your $250 in bonus bets today.
At the end of our show yesterday, James, we got to a Duke Tobin quote from his pre-draft presser that demanded more conversation, and we often don't have the opportunity to circle back to topics like this. But this one, I thought we would. Duke Tobin, as part of that presser, claiming or stating or lying directly that the Cincinnati Bengals don't have a bunch of starting needs. They have starters across the board, was essentially the Duke Tobin claim. There's not a whole lot of space for them to absorb, was I think the word he said, rookie starters. And I'm looking at the depth chart right now, and I see Cordell Volson, Cody Ford still penciled into starting jobs. Lucas Patrick potentially in contention there at guard. Jackson Kirkland potentially in contention there at guard. I mean, all right, let's get to the defensive side of the ball. You still have Jermaine Pratt penciled in as a starter. We're expecting the need for a third linebacker to play, I would say, at least 20% of the Bengals snaps in 2025, and that's not a huge amount, but linebacker 3, currently Oren Burks or Mumajong Meta or Shaka Hayward, and there's no linebacker 2 if you assume that Jermaine Pratt is a guy that they're seeking to replace. There are questions at safety, although I could buy Duke Tobin at least selling me on the idea that we have our starting safeties. You could get to a point where you could sell me on that if it's Geno Stone and Jordan Battle, but I have a much harder time getting there at guard and at linebacker. And even to some degree, like who's starting opposite Trey Hendrickson right now? I would guess that could be a veteran, even if they drafted a guy in the first round at edge. But that rookie edge rusher, if they do take him in the first round, will get into the lineup very quickly. So I'm just not there. There's some clear starting needs, especially at guard. And I just don't buy it, Duke. I'm not buying it.
It's fair. I think how many edges are starting over Miles or Joseph? There aren't many.
Well,
There aren't.
Yeah. Not right away, not in week 1, but I think like by week 6, if they drafted a guy that they should have drafted in the first round.
Mike Green? I don't know. I don't know if Mike Green starts at all. But that's it. If they take him at 17, you would hope, right? Anyways.
The same way I felt about Amarius last year when we had this conversation about Amarius Phipps, not necessarily having to immediately start, but I maintained after they drafted him that he should be starting that season.
I don't think it's close to that. I think it's because they're hoping Miles Murphy is a dude, like a real dude.
Okay.
So
great. Hope all you want, you know?
Sure, but they took him in the first round, like they fired their defensive coordinator partially because he couldn't get Miles on the field enough or didn't get Miles on the field enough. Like I think that's part of how they view that. But to your point, they need starters, and there's going to be like, I kind of think that their starting defensive line is already there. It doesn't mean that they don't need more pass rush because they do at both spots. So I'm not debating that. And if you draft one, they're going to play a lot. They'll play enough snaps to make an impact. The Jermaine Pratt thing is so interesting because he was clearly out on Jermaine. Like when asked about it, like, yeah, we've tried to trade him. We've explored that. This linebacker class isn't that good. Like,
no,
you could get really stuck if that's what you're banking on. And so I don't know. I don't know what the thought there is. Maybe that's why Jermaine is still on the roster. They don't want to get stuck. I totally agree with you 100% on. I don't think they have a starting guard. They've had like selling the idea that Lucas Patrick is a starter because he's started games is like saying Oren Burks is a starter because he's started games. They've usually started games because there were backups thrust into that role. Now, Lucas Patrick is far more established. I get that. But we kind of know what he is. And he would be a really high-end backup with versatility. But if he's a starter, he's a below average starter, is how I would phrase that. And so, yeah, guard, certainly. You need pass rush. You have snaps everywhere, honestly, where that you could address multiple spots. There's a reason we haven't talked about wide receiver. We think wide receiver is pretty much shored up. It doesn't mean they wouldn't take one because you never know, but probably not. That's not a need necessarily. Outside of that and like quarterback, there are needs. Now, some of the needs are bigger than others, but you could go up and down from safety to linebacker to defensive line to guard to running back to tight end and be like, could use another guy. And so I think that's where hopefully they are deep down, even though, yeah, Drew Sample is their starting tight end. Like, I get it, but come on.
And we just spent so much time last night discussing, wringing hands over how they could potentially convince themselves that taking a tight end early is the right thing for them to do to make the biggest impact on the team. And Drew Sample is, like you said, currently penciled in as a starter, which is a wild thing to put next to each other. A couple of facts there.
And for those wondering, yes, Mike Gesicki is re-signed, but he's basically a wide receiver. You should think of him as a receiver with the way they use him, because Drew Sample is the one that's blocking and doing all of the tight end stuff.
So tight end aside, we can agree that there's obviously a starting need at guard. No questions about that. Like, even if you believe Cody Ford is a starting guard, Lucas Patrick is a great versatile backup to have. Like you said, Oren Burks is a great first linebacker off the bench. He'll be a special teams key piece for Darren Simmons. Duke Tobin talking about those guys as having starting experience versus talking about TJ Slayton as a starting level nose tackle is different verbiage for, I think, a reason, or maybe it's subliminal, and he just didn't realize what he was doing in that moment. But he did not call those guys starting level players the way that he talked about TJ Slayton as a starting level nose tackle. He talked about them as guys with starting experience, which I think is a tacit understanding and admission of the fact that they don't necessarily have guys there that they like to start. There does seem to be a level of confidence in Cody Ford right now that gives me some pause from the outside. And that also goes into the Zach Taylor presser where he's talking about Cody Ford getting to work at one position and the fact that last year he's working at multiple positions and stepping in with minimal reps at all these different positions across the offensive line. I have a hard time not seeing Cody Ford as anything but a finished product at this point in his NFL career. Yeah. Again, you can hope all you want. And I say that about a few players on this team. And we said before that hope is not a plan. I think we have beaten the dead horse many times that we would like to see them be more serious about both starting guard spots. But at the bare minimum, there's a very clear need to add one starting level guard to this team.
Yeah, you just have a lot of meh. Like Cordell Volson is a fine backup. Like, I'm fine with him as a backup, but he's, one of those things where it's like, all right, is that getting in the way? What's getting in the way here? And maybe nothing. Maybe they draft two guards on Friday. Maybe it's back-to-back guards, 49 and 81. Maybe they take one in the first round and the third round. Maybe they go 2 and 4, and we feel completely different about their offensive line by Sunday. But as of today, like it feels ridiculous. Like you could argue that, like, much like they let go of Alex Kappa, which was the right move from a playing standpoint. But it's like, all right, well, did you get better there, or did you just subtract the guy and save that money? And there's a big difference between the two, and that's what's rough. Is it's like, all right, well, fix it, and we'll see if they can fix it. And there are guards through day 2, I think can be starters, or offensive tackles that will become guards that can be starters, and we'll see if they can get one.
And then you're still relying on a rookie, which isn't the best place to be, but at least there can be a ceiling, some upside, some growth over the course of the season, some guys that aren't essentially finished products. And it'll be fascinating to see what their approach is there, as again, they just didn't do enough before the draft to feel comfortable, feeling more open to various other possibilities. We'll continue that conversation a little bit and then get to some players that maybe we haven't talked about enough in this draft cycle to finish this episode coming up next.
Did you know your Fire TV is also an Xbox? Turn any TV into your gaming and entertainment hub with Fire TV Stick 4K devices. No console is required. All you do is grab your paired controller, subscribe, or sign into Xbox Game Pass Ultimate with EA Play included, and you're ready to play. Dive into hundreds of premium titles from EA Sports College Football 25 to Call of Duty Black Ops 6. As easily as you stream all of your favorite shows. It's gaming made simple, and it's all on your Fire TV. With 4K streaming, watch more than 1.5 million movies and TV episodes from your favorite subscribe services like Netflix, Prime Video, Disney Plus, Max, and more. I have a Fire TV Stick 4K. You're not going to regret it. Head to Amazon.com/Fire TV Locked On to get started. Xbox Game Pass Ultimate subscription and compatible controller are required. Available on select devices, including Fire TV Stick 4K, Fire TV Stick 4K Max, and Fire TV Cube.
There are some players that we haven't talked about enough throughout this process, and some of those players could be asked to do some of these things that we're talking about in terms of some of these starting needs or significant contributor needs, as would be the case for several defensive line positions where maybe it is, BJ Hill, TJ Slayton are your starters on the defensive interior for week 1. Maybe it is Trey Hendrickson and Miles Murphy are your starters for week 1, or maybe it's Joseph Osai, who knows? But maybe those veterans are your quote unquote starters. The official game book will list them as starters when reflected upon later. But when we talk about starters, on defense in particular, I think this is, to me, players that play like 45 or 50% or more of your snaps in rotational positions. And so that definitely applies to me on the defensive line. Linebacker, like I said, I think is fascinating. Guard, starter, very clear cut, the guy who's intending to play the whole game. Those guys play 100% of your snaps, no questions there. So are there players, James, to you, especially for these roles? We hinted at Shamar Stewart a little bit yesterday that we haven't talked about enough in this process. I think another one that there's a lot of steam on social media for, and we talked about him when he visited with the Bengals, Josh Connerly, Oregon tackle, potentially guard in the NFL. Another one of those guys. There was apparently a private workout for the Bengals with Wyatt Millam, a name that we haven't talked about a ton. That's one to keep an eye on as well. Where do you start when you want to think about guys that we haven't talked about enough?
Shamar Stewart, because of how likely it is that they take him if he's there at 17 versus how scared we are of the production and lack of refinement of his game, and just getting a guy that isn't ready to go from a pass rush standpoint. And it is just kind of there. Like, I think Shamar Stewart is going to be head and shoulders above Mike Green and James Pierce Jr. on the Bengals board. And the only reason I'm saying it that way is because I think there are a lot of people that love those other guys, Green and Pierce. And I think the Bengals are going to look at Shamar Stewart, and I know they like him, and they're going to say he's going to be able to hold up against the run better than these other guys. We know he's got the athleticism. We know he's got the build, and we can teach him some of this other stuff to make him a high-end pass rusher. Like, I totally think that if he's there at 17, he may be their top target. And so mentioning him, we'll mention him again tomorrow when we predict what they do. It doesn't mean we're going to make him the 17th pick, but he's going to come up. And I just want to make it as clear as possible for our everydayers, for everyone watching and listening. Shamar Stewart is very much in play at 17, and we haven't covered him a ton. I think almost trying to speak it into existence that they go elsewhere, but because there's so much risk there, maybe he ends up being an awesome player, but there's a ton of risk at pick 17 for a guy like that. that had a whopping 4.5 sacks over the past 3 years.
And I'll repeat what I've said numerous times before, that there are plenty of folks that think Shamar Stewart should be one of the top edge players
No
drafted
doubt.
in this class that do look at those traits. And the NFL, as Duke Tobin said, often banks on traits. And ideally, as he said, you have production and you have traits and you have technical refinement, but often at least one of those things is missing. I mean, Dane Brugler, for example, has Shamar Stewart at number 9 on his board.
And that's the lowest he's been. I think he
Well,
had him higher earlier in the process.
Oh, sure, for Dane. I was going to
For
say
Dane.
that. Then you look at Mike Renner, who has him at like 39, and doesn't believe the way that some of the other scouts out there believe. But the athleticism, I think, certainly exists. Sequencing pass rush moves, finishing, those are issues. I mean, talk about Derek Harmon missing tackles. According to Dane Brugler, you got a 27% missed tackle rate for Shamar Stewart listed in the Beast.
Dude,
which
that's unbelievable.
For a defensive lineman, that's a pretty crazy number. Yeah,
1/4, like
more
that's
than, yeah.
Oh my god! I mean, that's rough. It's rough. But then you see, like, since we're just naming, like, I saw a graphic from the 33rd team, literally comparing all the measurables and pre-draft testing to Myles Garrett, and it's like, yeah, outside of the key number there, like the sacks number. But I do wonder, like, he did rack up pressures, and the Bengals want disruption, and so will they view it that way? I don't know. I think it's good that we're having this conversation, because we may be having a similar conversation a few days from now after they make the 17th pick.
I think everybody knows the story there. There are many, many Bengals fans that dread that pick, and it's just a risky pick. I don't think I really dread many picks in terms of like truly fearing, like, oh man, that's a franchise ruining decision. It's when they go like totally off the reservation that it
Sure.
gets me. And they have a history of doing this too. I would throw Mykal Williams into the same kind of conversation, by the way, as another very toolsy edge rusher, probably going to be seen as very stout against the run in the conversation for the first round, because they have a history of, in the first round, occasionally going for those toolsy guys. Myles Murphy, obviously a very recent example of this. Dax Hill, to some degree, an example of this as well. John Ross, certainly an example of this from an athletic tools perspective. He was also a very productive college
He was productive.
player. But
yeah,
the idea of going for traits, Cedric Ogbuehi, another one of these where the traits were supposedly there for him to develop into this high-end athletic tackle. That
Billy
is
Price. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, well, he didn't.
I'm kidding. No, I was kidding.
The point is in the first round, you'll see them sometimes make those trade bets, but then it's the rounds beyond that where they go off the reservation sometimes, and that's where it's a little bit scary. Even in 24, Jermaine Burton is not a pick that we anticipated at all for character reasons. McKinley Jackson was a guy that probably went a round or two earlier than most projected. In 2023, it was relatively consensus most of the way through. Charlie Jones, I think, a little bit earlier than his consensus, but 22 with Zach Carter and Cordell Volson, 21 with Jackson Carman. They have this tendency to, in the late day 2, early day 3 window, sometimes go off the reservation, and those are the ones that concern me. Like, you can't have another Jackson Carman pick this year. Character aside, a player that doesn't work out in the second round this year, especially if you're talking about a guard, would be the franchise derailing kind of thing that I currently am like worried about, is them totally going down the board for an offensive guard prospect that we don't expect.
Yeah. Man, that you don't expect. That would be brutal. Like, because
they
Cordell
catch
was
us
picked,
most years with something we don't expect, right?
Well, Cordell was it. I didn't know Cordell. Like,
yeah.
Like, I had to like look in the Beast and like and fourth round, by the way, he's been productive for a fourth rounder, like, no doubt. But it's one, they shouldn't have put him in position to start right away. Like that's the issue, which goes back to the Jackson Carman pick. But you're right. Even the Drew Sample pick was ridiculous. And I think they know that now, but they've had those where it's like a really premium, valuable pick.
Mhm.
That's why people got on me, but that's why I didn't rule out running back on day 2. Like I'm not going to do that. I still won't, even with the Zach Moss news, which we didn't mention. The Zach Moss back. We don't have the
I
contract
meant
details. Yeah. Zach Moss is back. I don't think it takes them out of the running back market completely, but I think it lessens the need. That doesn't mean that they won't address it with a talent if he's really high on their board. I feel like that's how they're at.
Late day 3 still in play, but Duke
I think
Tobin
round 4 is in play.
talking about how deep the running back class is. Maybe Duke Tobin just feels like they can get a couple of undrafted free agents that'll have very clearly draftable grades.
Maybe. And if with only like if they don't trade down, maybe that is their plan with some of these needs and holes. Maybe that's why they've been all over JJ Roberts from Marshall, who's Mike Green's teammate at safety, is to try to get him there as an undrafted guy, even though it does feel like he's going to get picked.
Increasingly popular, it seems.
Yeah. So I think I agree with you. Like Shamar Stewart would be, it's a huge roll of the dice. It's going to the casino and saying, hey, I'm going to put it, all of it on black right now. And you hope that it works, or all of it on, you're Michael Scott and you're going all in on the first hand of Texas Hold'em, and you're not bluffing anyone, but you're really banking. And that's, maybe they think he's less risky than a Mike Green or than a James Pierce Jr. Who knows? But I certainly think he's in the mix. And I do think that off the reservation type picks, I had someone text me yesterday, like, hey, what round 2 or round 3 guy are they going to take that no one's expecting? And so that's the fun of trying to predict what they're going to do.
I'm just going to shout out John Sheeran's Emory Jones second round association for the Bengals, who Our Lads has as a second round offensive tackle out of LSU, but by consensus is a guy that shouldn't be picked until day 3. And it's that kind of thing that's now living in my head 2 days before the NFL draft. But tomorrow, James, we will issue our official predictions here on Locked On Bengals, and we'll have you covered every day of the draft this week. Until then, thanks for listening to this episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. Hoo day, and have a good one.